and I decided to move back home with my family. And part of my idea was I was like, you know what? I want them to get to know me as an adult and also to have different experiences and different memories of me being well, because they were so happy for me, but there was still, at times a kind of like a referencing back. And I was like, I want you to like experience. And there was a little bit of an adjustment period, right? That took some transition. But it really helped. I'm really grateful.
Welcome back to the Mind Change podcast. I am your host, Heather McKean, and back with us today is McKenzie Brewster.
Hey, y'all.
Our Mind Change friend and practitioner. And today we're going to be talking about external narratives, which we'll get into what that means here in a few minutes. But before we move on, please do all the things. Subscribe, download, like, right? Mm-hmm. So follow us on social media, all those things. Please, it helps us to be able to continue to create lots of wonderful free content for you and your family and your friends and all the people out there. So yes, welcome. Here we go. All right, external narratives. What in the world? What does that mean?
Okay, so we had a previous conversation talking about secondary gains and this idea that any problem that we have, any illness, any relational issue, that there's always some sort of functional reason for it to our subconscious mind. And I wanted to continue with that conversation and thought it fit in really nicely with a question that we received. We put some asks out to people like, hey, what are some things you're familiar with mind change? What would you like to hear us talk about? What's something you're curious about? Things like that. And one of the first responses back we got was someone asking, how do you deal with when you change, but someone wants to continue to hold you in a view of illness or trauma? And I thought that was a really interesting idea to explore. And it also reminded me of a kind of a framework that you use to talk about what you call subconscious scripts, which we'll break down. But I thought that was kind of a nice in way. So what do we do when we change, but people in our lives, someone else wants to hold a view of us of illness or trauma?
Yes, such great question and response, and thank you for those of you listening, watching. We love the questions. We want to make mind change accessible and understandable. There's a lot of neuroscience and there's a lot of research and stuff that we kind of sift through and figure out and pick out the parts that, hey, there are some people interested in that stuff. Yes. Great. It's going to be there for you. But I think most people are just like, how can I change? And how do I stay in this? And how do I, transition out of whether it's chronic illness or relationship issues or mental health issues or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Stuck patterns.
And that's even part of what the motivation for the podcast is. I think earlier on in my journey, we've been friends for a long time. And as I started learning this, there'd be moments where I'd call you and we just would have a simple conversation. I'm like, okay, like I'm learning this, but wait, how do I deal with this? What does this mean? And I learned so much from you and a number of other people just through our conversations. And so to be able to now have them in a way that's kind of a broader conversation, I think is really helpful.
Almost everything I'm going to share is probably sourced from conversations of like, how do we explain this in real life terms, metaphor, analogy that works, that we can hold on to and kind of move forward with. So the one that I came up with, and not everybody will get this, but I think there will be a lovely little subset of people that will understand this deeply, is I have a history of acting, as do you. And even if it's just your middle school play, that you were in, or your preschool little, performance that you did, I think all of us understand what it's like to be following a script that is dependent on the group kind of unifying and moving forward, right? Your part is important for the whole.
Okay.
Because let's say you're doing your preschool performance of we're going on a bear hunt, and you say one line that the rest of the group is supposed to respond to. If you miss your line, the rest of the group gets a little lost, right? You practice it so many times.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're saying, like, if we're all in a play, we're all in some sort of project together, there's a script that we're following and we each have a role, and that's really important to follow. And we all work together operating off of this script. And if I'm not following the script, then that has implications for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Because our brain likes to simplify and make things easy, right? It categorizes, it groups, it's efficiency. It's always searching for efficiency. So this is one of the ways that we do this. Roles, identities, I'm lumping them all together and oversimplifying it into this scripting process.
Okay.
So I know when I was part of a theater troupe when I was young, and we would do these shows, we would practice and practice and practice and practice. And the goal is to memorize your script, right? Nobody wants to you cannot be on stage and have your script. No, that's not an okay thing. So you work and you learn to play your part with an ensemble group, and you rely heavily on these little taglines. Like, so I know when I was acting, I would sort of sum up my next part, like what I was going to say next, based on maybe the last 2 or 3 words that you would say, because I don't want to memorize your whole spiel. It will mess with mine, right? So I know mine.
Yes.
And your last few little words trigger me to move on to my lines. And then we move through. Some of the worst feelings on earth come from being on stage and someone goes off script. I've been out there, someone skips pages in the script. And so many things have to happen for you to understand why you're here. Maybe you're not even in the same position that you're supposed to be in. When someone goes off script, it's terrifying.
Did you notice that the energy between us right now just went down? Like, it was almost like a visceral thing for me imagining that happening. Like, I quieted. I just felt the shift.
It is. I got goosebumps on my legs. Yeah. Like, it's a real thing. So what happens now? This is not just in acting. This comes from things that we do on a day-to-day basis. So the very premise behind hypnosis, the handshake induction.
Oh yeah, break down for people who aren't familiar. Can you go just actually really simply, what is hypnosis? And then the handshake induction?
Right. Well, okay. So all of you hypnotherapy people out there and, hypnotists, please bear with my rudimentary just explanation in here. But really, hypnosis is the bypass of the conscious mind and getting into more of a programmable place of our subconscious mind. Okay. That's really basically what hypnosis is. Okay. So performance hypnotists oftentimes will get people into a state of hypnosis, so the bypass of the conscious mind, right, by doing what they call a handshake induction. And this is really because of what I'm talking about right here, the way that they're able to do that. Universally, a handshake is a pretty well-known response. I put my hand out, you naturally just, and we shake, right? So for you that are listening, we just did this. If I then go to shake your hand and I do something different and they do this it's a little sensory shift. And this is really the premise behind one of the most powerful parts of the mind change method, which is pattern interrupt. That's really what this is right here. It's a pattern interrupt, and they are then the response of the hypnotist put someone in an automatic state of hypnosis.
So it's that there is such a level of expectation that it is completely automatic, right?
Yes.
And so you just go into that. And then when that expectation isn't met, something different happens. It's like it's kind of befuddling for a moment. And it's in that moment that there's sort of this window in to do something different.
Yes. So in an acting script, right?
Yeah.
And someone does that, you are forced to figure out something different. Now, oftentimes what people do is will like, I call it, and I'm not sure, we'll call line. And in one sense, like obviously you can call for line and someone in the background when you're practicing throws you your line.
We love you, stage managers.
Yes. But in this way, you kind of go back to a really strong message to help get your partner back on script.
So you start indicating something to them to try to help them get back to say their line so that you can say your line.
Yes, we have to be on script. Otherwise, the show does not go on.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to be in a whole different story. So this is really what I started to see behind this scenario, this question that someone has, which is when people want to hold us in these same things. Okay.
Yeah.
So for instance, when I got well, Kent was calling line often for my what seemed to be inability to do things, or right, like he needed to help me. Now that got actually kind of annoying when I was coming from a well point of view, when he was coddling me in a lot of ways. Now from a sick point of view, I couldn't do these things, so of course he had to help me. Now, in my mind, I'm on a completely different play. Now, I'm on the Heather is well play, and let's move forward and do life. Kent is still in the role of caretaker because he hasn't made the changes yet, and that's what he's comfortable with. I've broken out. I'm on a new play. I'm in a new city, all these different things. He's not there yet. Now, before I really got this, I was highly annoyed by Kent and thinking that he's just not believing in me. Like, what? Don't you see that I'm well?
Yeah.
And okay, this messes with your head a little bit. You think, well, you're the person that sees me every day. If you can't see that I'm well, am I?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we are so used to orienting ourselves and our identities and our belief systems around it working for everybody else in our environment.
Yeah.
Which I'm not saying that's a negative thing. That's a herd construct. It's a safety construct. It's a community construct.
Yeah.
To be outside of that all the time is not safe. Okay, right?
Right.
So you don't want the contrary person always, always wanting to be different, always wanting to argue for the sake of arguing, always that contrary spirit.
Yeah.
Right? Which, let me tell you, if you're one of those people or one of those people, they are doing it for a good reason. It's a different belief system for them. But when Kent was doing that, I was just like, I can't believe, I got angry, right? And had to sort of step back and go, what is this? And that's where I really started to suss out and identify, this wasn't about me only.
Right.
He had a relationship with my illness as well. And he had his way of surviving or, maintaining that he had to figure out how it worked. And his role then, the script that we played was sick person caretaker.
Yeah.
Couldn't speak up for myself or these different things because of being ill in some way or disabled in some way. So he was the rescuer and the protector by protecting my time and my space and my energy, and because I needed rest.
Yeah.
Which really was my job and shouldn't have been outsourced to anybody else, but I didn't know that at the time. Okay. When you go off script, which is what I did. Yeah. I didn't only go off script, I went off play. Right? Completely different thing. I have to understand, or it's really helpful to understand that person isn't doing anything to try to rope me back in or it's not that they don't see it. In fact, they're reacting really strongly because they do see it.
Yeah.
And they're uncomfortable often. And our conscious mind wants to say and get involved and go, but he should be happy because you're well.
Yeah.
No, you shouldn't. He should know then. We'll now just treat you like a well person. Guys, we just don't operate that way.
No, it's just not practically how it plays out.
It's not the way the brain works.
Right.
It just isn't. You can fight with it all day long in your conscious mind, but you're just going to end up feeling more this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So the more people I started to hear this from, this analogy or this metaphor or whatever it is came up to me about the acting. I remember feeling that way of when someone would go off script and feel like for the both of us, the best thing is to get back in the conversation we already know. And this couldn't have been more clear to me than when Kent and I were in, you would call it an argument, although maybe the way we argue looks a little different than the way other people argue. So we were in this particular argument and I realized, oh my gosh, I'm like a psychic. He's going to say this. And then I'll say this, and then he'll say this, and I'll say this. And oh my gosh, we've been here 100 times before.
Yeah.
And it really ends the way either one of us would want it to end. And realizing that this is not me anymore. I actually don't believe in the role that I would have to stay in to keep doing it this way.
Yeah.
So I was like, what power do I have in this? I'm going to go off script. Just going to have a different reaction.
Yeah.
A different response. And how did I pick that? Now, first of all, the awareness came and then I thought through from the next time that we did this, like, okay, how would I want to be in this situation?
Yes.
Like,
right. Because part of what happens is we're practicing, we're drawing from previous resources. We're practicing so much that when we come to those situations, we're already primed to react. So even just the idea of like, well, how would I like to show up? How would I, and it's not so dependent on the other person then. It's just about the kind of presence that I want to hold that creates that opening and that opportunity.
Yeah. Almost every fight, argument, conflict, you have two people on autopilot.
Yeah.
They're not really able to listen. They're not really able to meet each other from a different perspective, unless there's intention behind it and you understand that. But most repetitive programs are because you have two people that are just on autopilot.
Yeah.
I can't actually even hear you because I can't let you change my mind because I wouldn't know what to say next.
Yeah.
Which means then who am I and what do I believe? And it's this whole existential crisis. And I would look really vulnerable in the midst of somebody that's coming seemingly, or I'm perceiving as coming at me. Choosing vulnerability does not seem like the safe option.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Okay. So that's what happened with this sort of argument with Kent and I. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Then that idea of this scripting came even more clear. And as an actress, I'm thinking it's never okay to go off script. And so I had to sort of say that metaphor has met its end, served its purpose, and step outside of that and go, yeah, it's actually okay to change. None of us likes this play.
Right.
Really, none of us likes this ending stinks. It's like, it's not a great one. So it's okay to get off script on this. And we're not on a stage.
Yeah.
I want to be more real and more authentic and I need to come out of this.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I got that idea and I thought, this is going to be so awesome. I'm going to come in as a completely different person into this next argument with Kent. It's going to be great. And I did. And he kept coming at me with the same response. And I'm like, dude, I know, but I'm going off script. But what I recognized was he was elevating.
Yeah.
He was escalating the need, the desire, maybe even the tempo of, or the inflection of the argument. And I could feel almost, if I would check into my body, there was a desperation happening in him.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is not the result I was thinking was going to happen. But I'm choosing a better path. And wants to go back into the script and
It's trying, like, upping the ante to pull you into the script.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then again, I had to be
Like, take your cue. Take your cue. This is what we do.
yeah. And I had to step outside of judgment.
Yeah.
And just be like, of course he's doing that. That's what's comfortable. That's what he knows.
Mm-hmm.
That I did the same thing in every relationship for always. So
Right.
he'll get there eventually when it feels safe enough that I'm not going to go back into character.
Yeah.
Right. And then leave him hanging.
Mm-hmm.
So I need some time to show like, oh, I'm actually never going back to that script again.
Mm-hmm.
So I recognize that's my work.
Right.
My work is keep staying authentic, keep staying real, keep being in that moment of, and I think it's really important for us to understand, we think, yeah, but now I'm being patient, or now I'm being calm, and now I'm being, instead of angry, instead of this, I'm choosing this better way. And why are they not reacting well?
Yeah.
Well, they were not in this conversation that happened all in your mind and body. And also it is uncomfortable to be in an uncomfortable situation. They don't know it. It's not known.
Right. It's unfamiliar. And so it takes more effort. And again, that whole idea of metabolically, your brain is trying to manage for what's the least amount that I have to do, unless you're properly resourced to embrace doing something different. It's a bit of a risk.
It is. And it's like it creates a state in that person's body.
Yeah.
And you just have to like be aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the more I started to become aware of that, now for some people, when you don't realize this is happening, our goal is to reach homeostasis again.
Mm-hmm.
And so now homeostasis means to return back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, our normal in a lot of these relationships is quite toxic to both of us in a lot of ways. So I have to understand that the pull is going to be to return back to the known.
Yeah.
And I have to be able to sit in that uncomfortability and realize that it's nothing wrong. I'm not doing it wrong. I'm not doing something wrong. It seems like I might be harming or hurting this person because they have a very uncomfortable reaction.
Yeah.
But as long as I know, like patience, kindness, gentleness, like creating space, keeping my body regulated might actually look like uncomfortable in someone else's presence. Mm-hmm. But I'm doing no harm.
Right.
I know I'm doing no harm. So even though it might seem like harm is happening, then I need to really hold that space for myself and hold that space for another person. And it's really confusing and nobody talks about this, right? And so I think that we have to kind of get through that. So we talk to our course students and to our clients and everything about this because inevitably it happens.
Right.
When you go back into, so almost always we're going to be doing childhood work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And reframing some things and experiences with your parents. And when we work with adults who then go back into family situations, inevitably, you've got that thing happening where they're trying to pull you back. Mm-hmm. They may try to baby you, or they may try to trigger you in some way. They're not trying to trigger you.
Right.
That's not what's happening.
They're doing what's familiar, and now you're doing something unfamiliar, and so they're just going off the what had been the modus operandi, and
Yep. That's how they know you.
Right.
That's their lived experience with you. And so we can get angry and frustrated and feel like we want to avoid those situations. But what we need to realize is they need some time, some different experience with us being different, because they need to have the space to reframe.
I remember after I really started getting well, I'd been living in on the West Coast, and I decided to move back home with my family. And part of my idea was I was like, you know what? I want them to get to know me as an adult, and also to have different experiences and different memories of me being well, because they were so happy for me, but there was still, at times a kind of like a referencing back. And I was like, I want you to like experience, and there was a little bit of an adjustment period, right? That took some transition. But it really helped. I'm really grateful. Moments of uncomfortability, sure. But that I got to reform that and change the relationship dynamics, change the role that they saw me in. And I think that's an analogy that came up recently with a client I was working with that I loved, is they were talking about some of this, right? That they're getting ready to make some of those changes and kind of preparing themselves for some of that uncomfortability and not planning for it, but just sort of contextualizing it and working through the different layers so that it wasn't quite as uncomfortable. But part of it was, this idea of roles that we have, roles in our family. And part of one that they had identified was the one that made everybody happy. And that had been part of their survival strategy. And that's a really common one. Mm-hmm. And so other people feeling like they weren't being loved, like, why aren't you spending as much time with me? Where they're like, I'm just not in a place in my life where I can do that. By the end, they got to a point where they found like, oh, I think I know, this is the balance that I want. This is how this is going to work for me. And whatever reaction they have, they can have. But the idea came out of that they were retiring from that role.
Yes.
And like, okay, like I've done that role. It served me well. Here we go. But I've invested a lot and now I'm going to enjoy my retirement and then I'll discover a new role later on, but this is going to be mine. And I think one of the things that ended up being a little bit of a breakthrough moment too was realizing that even though in the moment it was really uncomfortable, what they most wanted was for everybody to be happy. But by making it dependent on them, what they did, they were actually holding everybody else in a, not captive, but not giving them as much opportunity to be able to have that sense of happiness wherever they go. So them making that choice and being willing to have the uncomfortability themselves and the uncomfortability with their family was actually the opening for them to get more and for them to be okay that they were happy even if everybody else wasn't happy. The not doing the same thing was really frustrating or challenging to the way that they had operated, but them letting everybody else have their reaction and still being fine no matter what and seeing that they could just be happy and choose that and do the things that they want to do and spend time with friends, and was actually that seed planted that to their family that gave them that opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we see this over and over and over again with clients.
Yes.
That's why this came up so readily.
Yes.
Is because this happens. I think oftentimes in maybe traditional therapy models, we're trying to work with what we have. And a lot of that operates in the cognitive conscious mind, mm-hmm. right? And so there is this idea of identifying things or people or situations as like toxic or, it's not safe to be around these people and various things. And that's the motivation that they're needing to actually get into a different space.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there are frameworks for that. I think the work that we do helps go back and give you references where even if there is someone operating in an unsafe way, I don't have to keep them in that same role.
Yes.
I don't have to keep them in that same role. I don't have to keep them
different.
As abusive, mm-hmm. toxic, controlling, narcissistic, whatever, to keep me safe, right. so to speak.
It's almost like sometimes what people do is they'll hold somebody in that role still in their mind and in the past in the mind to naturally have the motivation to create to create the boundary instead of I can let go of holding you that way and I can still choose to engage in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
We probably need to do another episode.
I think I'm realizing this is a fuller topic that I think
boundaries
will be really helpful. It's a different approach.
Yes. I have a very
different approach
to, I respect this talk about boundaries. I think it's so important.
So good, so necessary.
I have a massive journey with that topic myself. But I had to come at it from a different angle. The way it was being taught, it didn't set well for me long term.
Yeah.
And I realized the motivation wasn't going to serve me long term.
Mm-hmm.
So like with this, that's why with this work, this idea of, and we're calling this external narratives.
Yeah.
Because it really is this thing that we have to keep. It's a narrative. It's a story. It's the script that we have to keep people in to operate, to feel comfortable to operate, which is a little bit of keeping us in a victimized mentality.
Yeah.
That I can only be this way whatever way I want to be, right? If everyone out there responds this way.
Could you take that and give me a more like practical example really quickly?
Yes. Like, for instance,
Okay.
I'll just use the one I've been using with myself and my husband. Like, I can only be well if I'm away from him.
Because he's holding me in this view that I'm not well. And so I have to avoid that because he's not validating or giving me the freedom to totally be this way. And so I have to create this space because you're not honoring what I know to be true and well. And I can't continue on that trajectory if you're going to hold me this way.
So one of the things that I realized was keeping me stuck, if you will, and a program that I didn't even recognize in my chronic illness was body checking. Which is we can talk about maybe another time. Like, there's this whole skill of body checking, tuning in to a level of dis-ease. Like, oh, I know I'm having a fever right now. I know my breathing is erratic. My heartbeat is skipping, or whatever various thing of condition that I was doing, and realizing like, oh, actually, I don't know how to think like a well person. What does a well person think when they wake up in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things I identified was, one of the things that was supporting me was, okay, remember, if you've listened to us up to this point, you have probably heard one of my earlier programming was programs that I did, core beliefs was that I was unlovable. That stays supported when no one checks in on you, right? Okay, nobody would ask how I was doing. Nobody in my mind cared how I was growing up or whatever, right? Also, being a caretaker, of others kind of puts you in that position to always be, and then you attract those people in who have so much going on. How could they possibly think of another person? So you stay within that framework. So Kent constantly asking me, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Are you feeling too sick for this? Are you able to do this? Can you do these things? Also being checked up on by friends, family, right? How are you feeling?
Yeah.
I could sort of realized, like, on my journey, like, that is how they do it to a sick person, right? I'm not a sick person. I don't want people to keep asking me how I'm doing.
Yeah.
Because that's the framework I had at that point, was like, they were only asking because I was sick. I didn't want to be sick anymore. So the fact that Kent kept saying those things to me, and now I'm addressing this question of needing to change the environment to be able to stay well, I thought I needed him to stop asking me anything about how I'm doing. Okay, another little step back from that. Is that really what I wanted? Like, what if that were true? What if he'd never again asked me how I was doing? How I was feeling?
Yeah.
Did I need rest? Right?
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking he needed to change. I needed to do the deeper work with that, right? I needed to change my script about what those call lines meant for me.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of reframe that, like, and understand, oh, that's actually love. That's a way he's loving. And so I needed to kind of help. And through the work, thankfully, I was able to actually give that voice and say, I'd love for you to ask me how I'm doing more from a emotional standpoint. Like, or just that you kind of want to know my thoughts and maybe how I processed the day, or just to be investigative, and I eventually realized, no, I don't want investigative. I don't want the way that sounds, but curious. I like to have curiosity.
Yeah.
Or just interest. Interest in me. Not because I need to be asked, because I might have some sort of deficit.
Right. Just because you care.
Because you care about me.
You were talking before too about the body checking thing and how that's part of where this started. And I was curious. I had a moment where I wondered if there had been a connection to you doing body checking in with yourself all the time. Was you checking in on yourself as a way of loving yourself? Like, oh, am I lovable? Like, well, no one else is checking in on me, so I'm going to check in on me over and over again.
Yeah, it's a maladaptive.
Like a maladaptive way of...
Because I didn't really inhabit my body much, which we could probably talk about on a whole other thing, right? I didn't have a lot of presence in my body, because what was stored, what I thought in my body, was a lot of pain. It was just memories. And it was a lot of things I was trying to avoid. Being in my body as a young child like what I mean by in my body is having an awareness, feeling all my feelings, being in touch with every part of me. I didn't have a safe place for that to happen. I was touched in ways that weren't good to feel. I witnessed things that weren't probably safe to see. There was ways I was spoken to that were not good. So I really began to dissociate out, stay in my head mostly.
Yeah.
I could control the world I lived in my head.
Yeah.
I could believe that people were doing things for different reasons in my head. You know, I could stay safe up there. And let me tell you, I'm not judging that anymore.
No.
That served me and kept me safe as a child and was a really good thing. Now, as an adult, it got really maladaptive. Part of all the chronic illness, which I've spoken about before, was a way of my body trying to call me back in to say, there's stuff in here you need to deal with.
Yeah.
Come in and deal with it. It's not that bad. We got your back in one sense. Like, it's not as bad as you think. You're all stuck up in your head. We can do this if you just come in, come down. So one of the maladaptive ways I did that was I would check in with my body, only looking for disease and sickness and illness, only looking for the things that were wrong. And I became really good at that, right? You become very good at what you practice.
Right.
So
it's a kind of hypervigilance that will then interpret anything in line with that belief that there's something wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every human possesses the ability to notice temperature fluctuations in your body. We just don't because our body's got it.
Yeah.
So it's actually not a great skill.
I used to do that one really acutely. Yeah. There was so much would be like, I can feel when the flush of blood comes into my face. And it was so minutely watching every little sensation that it affirmed it and it made it better. And it was the preoccupation and
Or if both of us share a journey with some form of tachycardia, right? Dysautonomia.
Yeah.
Which is a heart, involves your heart.
Oh, yeah.
The being aware of how my heart beats and the regularity of it was such a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah.
And maybe a news flash for people out there are arrhythmias all the time. All the time we have our heart reacts to stimulus.
We're meant to have heart rate variability. That's actually a sign of health. It's how we interact with it.
It's the returning back to baseline, to a healthy baseline that is an indicator of health.
Right.
When you concentrate on the fact that you have some sort of arrhythmia, it makes it more. Whatever we bring attention to, that usually then exacerbates. So temperatures and body and our heart rate and, all sorts of things. People can feel the digestive process in my small intestine right now. We actually all possess the ability to have that hyper awareness and that hypervigilance. But it is long term, you're looking at massive dysfunction.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually serve us. Our body knows how to do all of those things. If there was a deviation in that, that's because oftentimes there was an experience, a held experience, and the body's just trying to tell us to resolve that experience.
Right.
So it can resolve the reaction that happens in our body. So all of that with the external narratives is understanding. It's understanding partially that I am my own being. And that what happens inside of me is often going to have a direct reflection on what I see, feel, and think is happening on the outside of me.
Right.
That's really important. The next level thinking of that is to understand, hey, everybody else is doing that same thing too.
Right. Yeah.
And Ken's not trying to keep me sick, right? Our parents aren't trying to keep us whatever we have experienced them thinking. Now, often they do stay in a behavior and keep saying the same things and doing the same things because that's what they know.
Right.
They don't know us different until they do. And that's the beautiful, and we'll have so many people on that talk about this experience. You could talk deeply about this experience. I could talk deeply
about this experience.
I can talk deeply about this. I am estranged from my mom, a whole other episode that we'll talk about on what that looks like healthy. Yes. And the good, and I love her and I don't have to hold her as this evil, awful person to maintain. honestly, I feel like it's a boundary she is putting up,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. And I can stay in that, and that's a whole other thing. My dad is, if I could have written down the things that I in one sense did in the work that I did, when I'd go back and rework things, or they would have naturally come up. I wouldn't even have to, that he would just show up in my memories this way.
Mm-hmm.
He's so much that way now. Mind blowing.
I've had similar experience. I think it's part of, even the idea that someone else has this view of me. And I'm like, okay, well, what's my view of them holding that view of me?
Yeah.
I know. And I did stuff where I'd work through. I'm like, okay, how does me keeping them in that role of them holding me holding them, holding me that way, serve me? That's so layered. But changing the way that I held them internally, no matter what was going on, it was like I started to practice how I would show up and create the space for them to enter a different role.
Mm-hmm.
And it also set my reticular activating system. So what was I looking for and expecting from them? How did I treat them? As I started to treat them with the expectation of them being in alignment with, like this highest version of themselves, I found that it was the moments for me when other people started to change their roles as I had changed mine. I would encounter that uncomfortability. I'm like, wait a minute, like, this is what I wanted. This is what I even mentally prepared myself for. And like, this is all I've been. And then as it starts to happen, I would encounter that uncomfortability.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have that cognitive dissonance. I'd find little places where I still had this other narrative of them in my head, even though I'd been practicing this other one at the same time. But because I'd already mentally in some ways prepared for and was on the lookout for this other version of response, I had it as a choice. I had it as an option in those uncomfortable moments. So when I had that, the change in the pattern, right? Like the hypnotic induction, I was able to choose in moments, be like, oh, okay, wait a minute. I can respond, because they were showing up that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to let go of the way that I'd been holding them. And that way, and they've become, just like you're saying, more and more the things that I had hoped to, I'm getting to experience. But it wasn't, in the pursuit of all of that, it wasn't really about them. I recognized that it was about me and my relationship with myself and how I wanted to show up, and the kind of opportunity of how I wanted to treat them and be able to see them more clearly instead of all of the filters and narratives that I layered on top of them.
Yes, which is a gift. This work is a gift that keeps on giving, right? And you just keep unwrapping these little gifts along the way that are just, I did not expect all of this to happen over the years. I didn't expect to change to the level I've changed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because we've really set up a framework that makes us responsible in a good way, empowered in a good way, and also with awareness. We're not living in any fantasy world. There's no delusion. We're not making things up cognitively, consciously, and then expecting the world to just be that way. Mm-hmm. We're doing the work. We're we're taking the steps that the most likely outcome is this. And then also being very aware that everyone is their own individual. Yeah. And if they're not changing right away or responding to us in a certain way, they must have a really good reason for that.
And having so much respect for that.
Yes. Yeah. And that opens doors.
Yeah. I think the more that I've come to, I'm grateful to have seen your journey and that modeled in a lot of ways, but the more that I've come to respect and like appreciate and trust, there's really good reasons for why I'm doing something, and to letting go of the judgment and the peace around that, it's what's naturally extended into being able to do that and hold that with other people.
It goes back to, we say this, you'll probably hear this every podcast episode. We can only truly give what we have. Yeah. What we congruently have. We can only give that out. And then people think, well, I've got to get to this place to give this. It's in us somewhere. Yeah. So sometimes we have moments that just, we show up in this way. We're like, I never thought I could be this way. Yeah. And it's in there. It's just us creating the safety within us to continue to let that that vulnerability, that authenticity, that transparency,
Yeah.
all of that to really show up and for it to always be safe.
Mm.
And I can hear the people now like, yeah, but you don't know my situation. You don't know my husband, my parent, my partner, my child, my whomever, my boss. No. And we are going to talk about this. We'll have a whole other episode of this, I think, of whether, like, when we change us versus changing the outside of us. And can we only change if the outside changes? And if the outside changes, then we change that whole framework and really get into that. But we're never asking somebody to move into a place that isn't a safer option. Mm. Safe doesn't always, though, feel comfortable. And that's the distinction that we need to learn about ourselves. And that's a process.
Yeah.
That's something people need to build trust with. That's why we go back. Oftentimes we start in childhood and people think, oh, you're going to make me go back and just rehash my childhood and talk about my childhood. And I don't want to do that. We need proof.
Right.
We need to start out feeling these things, understanding and remembering what safety looked like, remembering what authenticity felt like, what it sounded like to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And when we have those resources held, internalized, programmed,
wired
actual neural pathways,
Yeah.
wired in that have been practiced and rehearsed and can start to be a little bit more accessed and automatic, then it becomes easier. Wouldn't you say that? Like, relationships outside of us have become a lot easier to navigate the longer you've done the mind change work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's not like you do one session and now I know how to react to everyone else in a different way.
No.
No.
It's been an ongoing thing. And discovering more of the resources that I already had, letting go of some, but then it's a kind of a practiced way of being. And as I've, it then informs the kind of relationship that you have with yourself. And so how I'm treating myself, because that's so practiced over and over again, I then can go in and do that with somebody else. And it's the feelings that I'm encountering are really similar.
Yeah, we can't expect to move into a world and feel like coming from maybe trauma, coming from lived experiences that caused us to dissociate for very good reason, and then just come in and expect the world to be safe. We don't know what it looks like.
Right.
We don't know what that feels like, sounds like. We don't have experience with that.
And that's part of what constitutes safety, is a level of familiarity, right? The metabolic, it takes so much metabolically to do something new. We want what's familiar. That can be what's safe, even if it isn't as ultimately safe. It's safer because it's what we know.
Yes.
But we have to, as we make that more familiar, like the level of vulnerability more familiar, that safety more familiar, then we can just be in it.
Right. So for people who've been doing years and years of therapy, and again, it has its purpose, it has its place. Talk therapy has its place.
And there are different kinds too.
Yes, all sorts of different modalities out there. But if for someone who maybe has been coming from a present moment approach, a cognitive way of like, okay, well, I'm just going to try to find safer people, leave toxic environments.
Yeah.
The reason, hopefully this gives you some context if you're one of those people out there, the reason it feels like you fall back into patterns is because you're trying to come into alignment with your known and held programming, your subconscious childhood programming.
Yeah.
Until that's changed, we're always going to source from that. So you're cognitively seeking something different, and every other part of your subconscious, which runs 95% of all of everything, and probably more, is actually bringing us back into alignment with what we are now deemed toxic as an adult, because it's looking for resolution back there.
Right.
It wants us, you can't be making all these healthy, wonderful choices without having the resource for it long term, because we've got an incongruency, that there's a dissonance there, right? So we need to do that work from our past, from our history, from our subconscious mind, then those things can meet and work together.
Yeah.
So there's reasons. And even then too, we can do all the subconscious rewiring. You have to be in community with people. You have to start to make these decisions and see.
It takes both.
It takes both. It really does. So yes, external narratives. Does that answer the person's question, how to deal with when you change and others want to continue to hold you?
I think so. And what I appreciate about it is, it puts it back to, okay, here's how I can deal with that, and kind of sets expectation of that uncomfortability is okay and it's part of the process.
Right. And those people are not, oftentimes, more often than not, they're not bad.
No.
They don't not believe in you. Oftentimes it's not even that they don't see change.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to repeat this. It's often you'll feel that exacerbation of program or things that you've deemed something that you do not like, or the way that they're being towards you. There seems to be an uptick in that because they see change in you.
Yeah. And one thing that I really appreciate too in the story that you told about you and Kent is you got to a point where, as you went through the different layers, okay, pause, stepping back, where then as you did that, you were able to come in and have a conversation with him and say, here's what I would like. Like, because you gave him room, you gave the space, but then it wasn't like, that's just how it is. He's there. It seemed like there was something in you that felt empowered to actually start to speak a little bit more directly, and you changed the conversation.
And I could take a lot of responsibility,
yeah,
which is helpful in going in, asking someone else to do something different.
Right.
It's the understanding of like, this is the way I came into it.
Yeah.
And it totally makes sense that we were doing this and that you were saying this, and thank you.
Yeah.
I see that you were trying to love me through that.
Mm-hmm.
When he hears me say like, oh, wait, you see I'm trying to love you?
Yeah.
And then he's like, wait, but there's a way I can love you better?
Yes.
He hears that different than he would have heard me being like, I can't have you, I just can't have you asking anymore.
Yeah.
I can't have you, you're keeping me sick. Which I think is an approach I took in the beginning. Let me tell you, the second one went a lot better, right? And so it's just we giving ourselves, like you said, and it's going to be so important that we keep saying this, when we do it for ourselves, when we start to have patience and time and respect and love for ourselves, then we can give that to other people. And that really doesn't mean everyone's going to change.
Yeah.
It is not safe for some people to move into a different place because they don't have the framework to sustain it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And then maybe boundaries out of that love and space. Maybe we do enter into a different relationship with these people at times or for a long period of time. But it's done from our point of view, it is done out of love. It's done out of space. It's done out of like, hey, I'm giving you what you so clearly need.
Yeah.
And I'm over here the whole time, like loving you from over here.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other thing we'll talk about in the boundaries episode.
Yeah.
But
That'll be great.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. And thank all of you, our listeners, our watchers, who help us understand what it is you need to know more about and help us kind of suss out the applicability of the mind change method and the mindset into your lives. So thanks again for joining us. I hope that you found value in this conversation. Please like, follow, subscribe, download, all of those fun things so that we can keep doing this for you and keep having these wonderful conversations. And again, thank you always for joining us on the Mind Change podcast, where we are trying to change the world one mind at a time.